nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria,
Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, laudetur Jesus Christus.
in secula.
This is Timothy Flanders of the Meaning of Catholic. Jesus is King. Welcome to another edition of the Terror of Demons morning show with co-host Kennedy Hall, the author of the book. We also have a new guest today, Mr. Jake Fowler. Jake, how you doing, brother?
Pretty well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, so glad Jake could join us. He's actually manning us up because he's at 4 a.m. Central Time right now. So props to Jake. Thanks for getting up for us. The Great Fast is upon us.
Mm-hmm.
The Great Fast is upon us. It's time to buckle up your seatbelt, take on some extra penance, do some bodily fasting, as we've been trying to say for the past few weeks now, and we're to talk about today, I think. You must bodily fast to overcome the very basics of gluttony and lust.
Mm-hmm.
Take on penance. You can join the Fellowship of St. Anthony if you're a member of the guild, a member of the patron community at Meaning of Catholic. You can join the Fellowship of St. Anthony. We're going to try to support each other as we take on some fasting and whatnot. So learning how to do this, especially as it is a virtue. Fasting is in fact listed as itself a virtue by St. Thomas, and even the ancients, the pagan philosophers, understood that you had to bodily fast. It was a virtue. So this week on Meaning of Catholic, we have later today, today is actually the anniversary of the resignation of Pope Benedict. This was the effective date of the Sedevacante, February 28, 2013.
Wait, Tim, you're coming out as a Sede?
Oh, yes. I just figured it out and excommunicated everyone except for myself.
You've been a crypto Sede this whole time. I knew it.
Yep. Do you want us to go ahead and send you the white cassock and Zucchetto?
Yeah, I've elected myself Pope, actually.
Good. That's good.
It's the nuclear option that we were faced with now that, we'll get into that. Yeah, actually, today we are going to talk about Sedevacantism because we're having Edmund Mazza on the show. Is Benedict the true Pope? That is his basic thesis is that Benedict is the true Pope. But we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about why we're having Ed Mazza on the show. We'll talk about Sedevacantism, why I would consider Benny-Planism to be an entirely different ballgame than Sedevacantism. We'll talk about Mazza's thesis. We will have a little back and forth because I do not agree with that thesis. I do believe Pope Francis is the true Pope. So we'll talk about that. That's happening at 3 p.m. today. And we'll also have part 2 of Pope Benedict Vindicates the Trads. That'll be interesting as well. That'll be about the trad myth about Vatican II. It's about a particular trope that trads repeat about Vatican II, which is wrong in my opinion, which also undermines the trad movement. So that'll be fun too. Then we also have Jake Fowler. You have a show coming up on a critical piece of Pope Benedict's teaching, which sometimes gets passed over, especially by trads, because we're talking all about the Latin Mass. We focus so much on that, rightly. But Tell us about your show coming up, Jake.
So today at 9:30 Central, so 10:30 Eastern time, I decided to take a quick look at his Regensburg address, which he delivered in September of 2006, back when I was just a wee lad. And Benedict kind of goes over the relationship between faith and reason and how they ought to interact on the university campus. But naturally, the media didn't latch on to that part. The media picked up on the side comments he made about Islam and violence. So it was a big firestorm. I remember it even back then thinking, wow, what did the Pope even say? Why is this such a big deal? But nonetheless, I run with it, kind of give an overview, a breakdown, and then some commentary. I did the best I could this time, though, not to let my own ideas, but Benedict's come through. So that'll premiere at 10:30.
No, isn't that tomorrow?
No, that's today.
Oh, it's today. Okay.
Yeah,
so
that'll be today.
Okay. So yeah, this is a very, very important topic, faith and reason. And even his side comments are critical. But this is a very, very important teaching of Pope Benedict, which needs to be really digested and thought about and pondered on. So thank you for doing that, Jake.
No problem.
So where are we at, Kennedy? Terror of Demons, recovering traditional Catholic masculinity. What's our topic today?
We're going to talk about bodily mastery, which is key leading up to Lent. Well, it's like in 2 days. It's chapter 3 of the book. Here it is. If you're just joining us for the first time, it's Terror of Demons. 10 books made the incredible cover, which I could not have done without them. It's very grateful for that. So the chapter is called Tame the Horse. And it's sort of, I explain why I called it that in the book, but the backstory is there is this children's movie, and it's called Spirit. I think it's called Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. Anyway, it's like one of those kids' movies. I think Matt Damon or something is the narrator of the story. It's a fun movie. My trad sensibilities were peaked when I put it in the book, so don't worry. It's not like crypto, something demons or something like that. Okay, it's just a fun little movie. It's totally non-political. It's just about this coming of age story of this horse who's sort of like the main character, along with this. We when I was growing up, it was Indian, then it was Native, then it was First Nation, then it was Aboriginal, now it's Indigenous. Seriously, it's in 5 different terms, which is funny when you talk to folks that are actually Native. They call themselves Indians anyway, and in the law they're still called Indians in Canada. I can't keep up. So it's a First Nations fella, let's put it that way, and he's from some tribe. And it's this time of expansion in the West, United States, and the railways being built. It's a fictional story, but it's based on sort of a true time period. And this horse is like this wild Mustang, and he gets captured by some not horse thieves, but sort of guys out there settling, and they sell him to the American military. They try to break the horse in. They just can't break him in. He's too proud. He just won't do it. And the only man who can break him in and make him his own is this Native fella, this First Nations fella. Anyway, it's this harrowing tale of, fighting against your own ego and all this kind of stuff. But the seminal moment, the climax moment in the film, it's a fun movie. It really is. And Bryan Adams, Canadian, is the soundtrack. So you get that sort of 1980s rock and roll vibe to it. And the climax of the film is they're escaping the Continental soldiers or whatever they are. And I guess it would have been Union, but anyway, they're escaping them, and they leap across this massive chasm. It's totally fictional. It's like a 40-foot jump or something. It looks like they're flying, but they come together in this moment where basically this really proud First Nations kid who's he's not the hero of the movie. He's not the anti-hero. He's just sort of this really rambunctious guy who's very prideful but really capable of a lot of things. And the horse is kind of the same thing, but they come together, and when they have unity of purpose, they do this incredible thing and achieve something that even the villain of the film, who is the American military leader guy, when he finds that they escape the way they do, and he has them within shot so he could actually shoot him, he decides not to because he kind of respects him. It's like, you did that, that's pretty cool. And the point is that movie, because I've watched it so many times with my kids, it's like one of their favorites. And I realized there's an analogy there between body and soul. And basically, because the human being has the intellect and is rational in the film, he's obviously like the soul because he's got the mind and the intellect. Okay. And he has his own purposes. And the horse is like the body. He's capable of these great physical things, but he's wild and he has to be tamed. And only once the body comes in subjection to the higher thinking, rational soul, only then can the most incredible things be accomplished. And when both of them are separate from each other and operate with their own directives or own objectives, it actually causes a lot of chaos and a lot of destruction. And that's exactly what our bodies and our souls are like. That's why I use the analogy. And there's also a point in the film where in order to break both of them down, they actually have to almost kind of do violence to each other in a sense. There's a lot of breaking in the horse, right? Which is something that people who have horses understand this. and our bodies like that. We actually have to break in our bodies because, I'm not going to get into major, neurological sciences or anything like that, but there's a reality that we all know, that you have instincts, and they're very animal, they're fallen, they're primal, whatever you want to call them. And if you're not careful, you'll basically just act off of those things. And today, I would argue, although there's lots of great things to the modern world in a lot of ways, we're talking here on this, computer technology, which is great, and we've never met each other in person, but we can all become friends, and that's fun. But we live in a very physically soft age. This is just a reality. We don't do things like ride horses very often. We don't mortify our bodies. We don't chasten. We don't do penances physically very much anymore. Even in a former age, you could be something like a decadent person, but you still had to live in a way that was physically difficult. So you had this natural virtue that we just don't have anymore. So I just put a heavy emphasis on having to tame the horse, so to speak, because if not, your body is like that Mustang that's going to destroy everything, and it's going to destroy it through instinctual vice. The main one being pornography, aka evil images, lust, but even things like gambling. I was listening to this podcast that I'll recommend. I've sent it to you guys in the chat. It's called Martyr Made, and this fellow who made it's amazing. And he tells the story of Dostoevsky, and I didn't know this, but Dostoevsky was a massive gambler, and he had a major gambling habit, and he was a true addict, like in the sense of it was pitiful, right? But then there was major moments in his life where it changed, and there were major tragedies and things, and that's where we get the great Dostoevsky we understand today. But anyway, we can all fall prey to these instincts that will destroy our marriages, they'll destroy our families, and they'll destroy the church in the human sense, in the institutional sense. And that's what we're seeing, because we were filled with people who haven't tamed the horse. Anyway, that's the background of it, and that's sort of the point of the whole thing.
Yeah, Jake, you have thoughts on that?
It just seems so counterintuitive today, because on the one hand, you have those natural instincts you were mentioning, and well, if it comes naturally to me, and if I believe I was made by God, then why is this a bad thing? I teach high school. I know, Kennedy, when you were teaching, you probably encountered this every day. Well, why would God make me in such a way and then punish me for being that way? And it's like, well, no, this is actually a consequence of the fall. In the state of original justice, Adam and Eve, their bodies would have been totally subject to their souls, and their souls totally subject to God. And we've lost all that chain of command, if you will, is just broken down. So to try to recover it, just like you said, you have to do violence to yourself in a way. And it's just such a foreign thing to modern sensibilities, but it's all the more needed, especially, Lent, and it's needed all the time, but for Catholics coming up to this penitential period.
Yeah, it's the idea that you're made a certain way, and that's not just about that. Obviously, in the extreme gets extended to like homosexuality, but even just in the basic, eating is good. Why can't I just eat all the time? And it's easy to see. It's easy to see when there are physical consequences. Our culture's at least tuned into that. So, for example, I'm getting ready to do some fasting. I'm gonna fast the hardest I've fasted this Lent, but I'm a 245-pound ex fullback. If I cut weight, I'm over 230 pounds. Like, that's just the build that I have. So I've eaten a lot. I'm a high calorie diet ever since I was like 14 years old. Fasting is very difficult for me. So I need to do it smartly, and I want to do it consistently. So I've been doing a lot of research on fasting and things, and it's amazing how much of a sense of fasting is actually present in our culture today, almost in a fashionable sense. People talking about water fasts and juice fasts and intermittent fasting and all these types of things, and that's good. But it's still lacking the higher order, which is the sense of virtue. It's still just attached to bodily things, so it becomes sort of a pursuit of vanity in some ways.
Right.
So
let me add something in. I wanted to add some Dietrich von Hildebrand, as
sure,
I always
go for it.
want to, because this is I thought what like both of y'all are talking about with high schoolers, and I've worked with high schoolers myself too. It is it's such a sad stance. Like, this is my natural inclination. Why would God punish me for this? Because that is even worse than the ancient pagans believed. Plato and Aristotle. I mean, they were able to just use their reason to understand that you needed to train your body. You had the Olympiad. St. Paul uses these. He says, he talks about those who run the race. He's talking about people who do actually run races in contests at the time. At that time, people who beat their body and make it their slaves, says St. Paul. He uses that phrase. He uses these different metaphors that are athletic metaphors because there were actually athletes at that time. I wanted to read this from this is from The New Tower of Babel by Dietrich von Hildebrand in the 1950s. And he says this on page 43. He says, classic paganism is nobler than the modern stance. Let us state that it would be a very great error to characterize this perversion of the modern man as paganism. Certainly the pagan world had issues. However, the pagan Greek and Romans approached life de facto as a creature, conscious of its dependence upon factors which he could not control. In Plato's Phaedo, Socrates says, when speaking about self-murder, he says, I believe that the gods are our guardians, that we men are possessions of theirs. The Platonic ideal of happiness was ecstasy, being exalted above ourselves by something greater than we are. The pagan man shared neither in the superstition, as modern man does, of unlimited automatic progress, nor in the ideal of discarding all bonds, of determining everything by his arbitrary will. He was reverent and conscious of his dependence upon something above himself. The spiritual content of many high goods was experienced as reality. The song of things endowed with values was heard. So the point is that we're not living through a neo-paganism. It's actually even worse than Plato and Aristotle. Because like Aristotle's the one who even is saying that fasting is a virtue. Because he can look at this and say, well, obviously you have to fast because we have all these Greek athletes who are disciplining their body. So this idea that because God made me that way, why is he punishing me? It's such a infantile, myopic understanding that the whole world revolves around me, and why should I have to do anything?
It's
right,
like
that's precisely it.
It's like a materialist paganism or something. It's because we are functionally atheist in a society, but we're not all the way atheist because there's still this moral therapeutic deism that a lot of people, they do. I mean, I dabbled with the idea of atheism in my early 20s, trying to figure everything out. And it's a disaster. Like, it's an absolute, I mean, there are certain people that are pretty smart, I guess, that'll call themselves atheists. But they're usually insufferable. It's just a reality. Like when I was looking into the whole thing, I would listen to guys like Sam Harris talk, and I'm like, you are the worst. Like there's just something about the way that the really committed atheists, where you start to sound really creepy. You really do. And I didn't listen to the talk because I can't stand the sound of Sam Harris talk about anything. But he was on Jordan Peterson the other day, and a buddy of mine from church listened to the conversation, and he was saying that basically the conversation between Peterson and Sam Harris was like, well, there is no God. And so he was being honest. He said, so the ultimate purpose of life, even though there would be no ultimate purpose, but anyway, the ultimate purpose of life is bodily well-being. And that's it. Like, if you're not pursuing that, then there's no point to life. And Peterson was trying to say, you're supposed to have suffering and for sacrifice for the future and all this kind of stuff. And it's when you go down that route of this modern atheistic, let's call it, it's more like superstitious atheism. That's what it is. I think that's probably what it is.
That's a good term.
Yeah.
Super,
like
because it's atheistic, but it's still like everything's a lucky charm. Anyways, it's nowhere. And it's just so gross. Like you can't help but become somebody who is ultimately weirdly very moralistic and also very selfish, because it's like the original proposition from Satan, from Lucifer, is you can become like gods, knowing good and evil. You kind of have to get to this petulant adolescent angst that Nietzsche promotes, where you're going to create your own values and be beyond virtue, but at the same time, you believe that there's this Darwinian utility to acting in conjunction with other people for some sort of human thriving, which is ill-defined. And at the same time, you deal with the fact that you have these instincts for love and compassion and so forth, which you think are ultimately just utility and sort of something that's functional. So you become this weird pseudo-moral, almost like mini God. It's very strange when you really follow the idea through all the way. Anyway, that's where we are today. That's my rant.
Now, I do think that there are some atheists that I mean, I knew an atheist guy in college, and we became pretty close friends, and he seemed to be what we might call sincere, or like of good faith or goodwill or whatever. And because it seems like some people, like, it feels, at least to them, that they're trying their best to believe. They're trying their best to understand it. And I've tried to understand, well, why this is, where there are some people who are like really trying to believe, or they want to believe even, or if the loss of faith is actually something that is tragic to them, in their life. But it seems that perhaps that is like, you have like selfish atheists who are like overtly selfish. And I think that at least I've met other atheists who seem to be, like, they didn't want to lose their faith, but they did. And I wonder if that's a function of the osmosis of these errors, these philosophical errors, which nobody knows how to refute. And you've been brought up in these universities where you have university professors. I had another university professor in college. I didn't have this guy, but I knew about him. He would actually prey on students' faith. So he would come in, and then he would attack their faith using his stupid philosophical arguments. He would use the situational ethics to disprove abortion and all this stuff. And nobody knew how to refute him because he's talking to these 18-year-olds, and they've never encountered this argument. So he's just destroying their faith. So I wonder if part of this is that people just have not even encountered a more robust defense of the faith in the face of the modern philosophical errors. And thus, they sort of honestly, if you will, of good faith, if you will, they encounter these things, and they just like, they don't know how to refute them. They're sad. They kind of lose their faith, and they're like, well, I guess I don't believe anymore because I don't know what to do. And that's kind of a sad thing. So at least that's my guess as to, these other atheists who are like not, petulant, infantile, as you say.
Yeah, but I got to push back on that, because that'll be their out for them. It is adolescent. This is the hard truths that the atheists have to understand. Like, if you reconcile and this is why I think Nietzsche is such an important study, because he is the atheist par excellence. Like, he loses his faith because of tragedy. He loses his faith because of tragedy, right? That's what happens. And the tragedy is very real. His life is very tragic, with his father dying and his family crazy Oedipal complex with his mother and his sisters. It's a disaster. So he has this period where he is trying to exert some sort of will in defiance of creation, in defiance of tragedy. Like, I'm gonna exalt myself above suffering because that's the manful thing to do. There's a reality. There's something almost virtuous about that, and basically in the Stoic sense. Turns out he was the opposite of his writings in his real life. He was actually quite a weak man. But anyway, but when you stay in that, this is what Sartre said: the only hard philosophical question is, why not suicide? If you decide not suicide, as an atheist, then you have to basically exalt yourself to some status of like, I create reality for myself. And along the way, you have to reject the entirety of human history to do so. You have to reject the entirety of the philosophical tradition historically. You have to basically put yourself above every single one of your ancestors. So it can't help but manifest itself as something like intellectual egoism. And when you live in that space, you will become insufferable morally, because you live a life of contradiction. So I totally understand that. And I was one of those guys where you lose your faith, or you realize you never really had it because you're not formed and whatever. But then you have to cross a Tiber. You have to cross a Rubicon at a certain point, and you have to say, I'm going to adopt this now. And at that moment, you can't help but become like a demigod to yourself who defines reality based off of your own subjective notion of it, and everything else must be rejected. It's a very strange thing. I see what you're saying, but
you're absolutely right, because
Right.
if you do become agnostic or atheist, you are rejecting all of the ancestors. Like that is a total innovation in the history of all of humanity.
Mhm.
Every single culture and they've all posited gods or God. And so, yes, I completely agree with you. I think atheists, especially in a Christian society, what's interesting is that they're using Christian morals to critique Christianity.
Mhm.
This is their favorite thing to do. I was like, yeah, I agree with you. The church messed up there because we're trying to actually be Christian, and you're critiquing us on Christian grounds. But okay, yeah, they're trying to be Christian morally and not Christian in their intellect. That's obviously a disconnect. Jake, what do you think? Thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I'll actually take a middle position and kind of between what you guys are saying. I think the tragedies that occur, obviously, they're all around us, but there's also that cultural osmosis, like you mentioned, Tim, of this: I'm okay, you're okay, and you got to look out for number one, and just everything in life, And again, I'm coming at this from what I see day to day in the high school.
Mhm.
Everything is focused on what are you going to do to be materially successful. And even in a Catholic school like I teach in, outside of my class and the other religion classes, is there a mention of God? Is there a presence there? I couldn't say, to be honest. And so I think if you expand that out across the entire nation and then the West in general, what we have is the culture saying one thing, the people that could be saying another are not saying it, and then this infantile, juvenile, whatever you want to call it, adolescent drive kind of kicks in to put yourself first. And eventually, like you said, Kennedy, that's going to take over. You're going to have to kind of let the rubber meet the road and commit to being an atheist, to being a hedonist, to being a whatever. And at that point, it's a failure to have wrestled with what you should have known but didn't. Right. And this, to tie it back to fasting, it's like if we as fathers are punishing our bodies at least twice a year during the penitential seasons, that's going to set a pretty strong example for our sons and daughters to say, well, why would my dad do this if the body was the end of life? What was the telos here? And because it's not, and at least the three of us know that, we're going to be able to provide that counterexample and resist some of that cultural osmosis that you were speaking of a moment ago.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jake. As fathers, making that example for the kids.
Yeah, I'll say one last thing too. Most people don't embrace full atheism. Most people become agnostic when they're like, well, I'm basically an atheist, but like, I don't know, because I think people instinctually know I'm going to have to take a certain leap of faith, ironically, which I don't want to do in order to go all that way, which is, I think the Sam Harris types are actually quite rare. I just think that they're the ones that are famous enough to be read and people consider their ideas. I think that's ultimately it. Most people don't become, sorry, go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you say that Nietzsche, and just so if people are not aware, Nietzsche advocated the transvaluation of all values. He advocated that Dionysus, who was the Greek goddess or Greek god of murder, lust, and drunkenness, i.e., debauchery, just orgies and chaos, and just the domination of the will. This is the preview to the Nazis. Nietzsche, that's what Nietzsche said. So destroy reason, impose your will on reality through sex, drugs, murder, and violence. That's his idea. Because he took it all the way. So, Kennedy, would you say that that's Nietzsche is kind of like an honest atheist because he's taking it all the way to the logical conclusion?
Yeah. And he was a Darwinian too.
There we go.
Well, because, I mean, how can you not?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
That's what animals do. People, this is why, I used to listen, I used to listen to so much Joe Rogan back in the day before I was reverted. And, this whole, every once in a while, there'll be some interview with some guy on Joe Rogan who's, it's a great interview, just subjectively speaking. He talks to someone with great ideas, and it's a fun interview, whatever. So I'll listen to clips of that or something. But then other clips will be mentioned on YouTube. Joe Rogan had this guy or something. And I saw one yesterday of some guy talking about fasting, because I'm preparing for this fast. And it was some doctor, and he's like, you got to get in touch with your evolutionary self. And I'm like, you sound so stupid. Like, these modern scientific, and this guy's really smart. He's like some doctor who heals people and has a great track record. He's like a really helpful guy to people. But it's like, get in touch with your evolutionary self. Like, you're in a cult, right? Like get in touch with the monkey. Get in touch with that chimpanzee.
Why stop there?
I
try to get in touch with my.
By the way,
you're going to eat babies. You're going to eat like your opposing
eat your own
feces
feces,
or whatever, and then throw your dung at somebody else. Like, that's what it means to get in touch with your evolutionary self. Well, not like that. Like the one I like. And it's like, okay, well, this is just you're just proof texting your sacred book of nature.
Why stop there? I prefer to get in touch with my inner amoeba. I just sit over there in the corner and I just don't do anything.
I just sit there and replicate my cells, and it's so stupid. But even then, I would argue that people like that, they don't really take it all the way to the conclusion. It's really just a sort of, it's an alternative creation myth is basically what it is, which is why we kind of do live in this paganistic atheism. Anyway, so strange. Okay.
Yeah. And shout out to our friend Gideon Lazar. He recently debated Jimmy Akin on Matt Fradd's show. So
how'd that go?
I was not able to watch it yet, but he told me it went well. And obviously Gideon Lazar, Byzantine Scotist, he's this friend of the show. So I'm happy that he was able to do that. It's a huge debate with Akin. So it's excellent that he was
Fradd was able to host that. That's interesting that he was able to do that, because that in the sort of mainstream Catholic circles, questioning this de facto accepted theistic evolution is seen as something very fringe. So good for him for doing that.
Yeah.
So how do we not become weird, pseudo-pagan, get in touch with amoeba evolutionary self, Rogan bros? How do we avoid that? Well, for one, pray the rosary. But that's the solution to most things. But chastening and mortifying. So our culture, again, understands discipline in a sense, and that's good. These ex-Navy SEALs, they come out and they got these great books on discipline, and people get that naturally. They understand that in the same sense that Tim was saying about the ancient pagan selves, right? Pagan cultures. They at least understand the nobility of not being a complete and utter animal all the time, which is a step, and that's good. And I applaud it. It's a good thing to do. But there's a step you got to go further. So what you ultimately have to understand is that we're chastening and mortifying. So I write here on page 46 of the book, I say the word chastity comes from the verb to chasten, which means to inflict trouble or pain for the purpose of correction. In essence, chastity calls you to go through a painful reality in order to correct disordered appetites for sexual pleasures. It could be that you need to correct inappropriate desires, or that you need to improve your control of healthy desires. We chasten ourselves by living lives that chastise our appetites. When we discipline our children by inflicting unpleasant consequences upon them for their bad actions, for example, we are giving them a chastisement. Hopefully, consequences chasten them in order that they grow in virtue through an acquired understanding of the consequential nature of sinful misbehavior. So essentially, we're not just beating ourselves up because we're like a dog, where we just have to be conditioned to not take food off the table. I mean, there's definitely a reality of that for very lower intellect. Like little babies can't be reasoned with, so you might tap the hand and don't touch that, or like little things like that. That's fine. But when we're chastening, it's actually an act of love, as St. Paul says. He talks about, for whom the Lord loveth, he chastiseth, and he scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. So chastening is not just conditioning. There's a purpose here, because you've been made for something. And in order to achieve that goal, there has to be a very particular form of physical discipline inflicted. And this is why Why has it always been fasting? Why hasn't Lent been about everyone just has to go and run a lot? You can eat whatever you want, but like running is good enough. Go and get shin splints. That's a good enough, that's a good enough penance. Or why isn't it? I want everybody to not sleep very much. Why doesn't the church say you're only allowed to sleep 4.5 hours a night? You could technically do it, and it would be miserable. Why is it not that? Why is it always fasting? Well, ultimately, it's not just about doing something to yourself that's unpleasant. It's about willfully deciding every day for a period of time to not do something that's pleasurable. That's ultimately what it is, because you're choosing suffering willfully over pleasure versus just inflicting pain on yourself arbitrarily. And in addition, I would say when you're fasting, which is the main form of chastening and mortifying, when you're fasting, you're also very weak, which means you have to rely, like your body becomes weaker, which means the urges become stronger, which means you have to rely more heavily on the higher self, which is your intellect and your rational ability to think, to choose something for reasons that are beyond physical reasons, if that makes sense. And I think that's the essence of chastening your body. Thoughts?
Yeah, and there's a theological connection there as well in the midst of all that. It seems trite to say, but I have to say that you need food to live, right?
Mhm.
Specifically protein. So, back in the heyday, when Charlemagne had the death penalty enforced for eating meat during Lent, so if you weren't eating eggs and if you weren't consuming dairy and you weren't eating flesh meat, you're depriving your body of protein for such an extended period of time. You're actually slowly like killing yourself. Right? I mean, that's a bit of an extreme. It wouldn't actually happen. Vegetarians live, quite happy lives.
Well,
Or
that's
so they
debatable.
say.
That's debatable.
Yeah, I don't know about all that, but you get the point.
Yeah.
But it's not simply, well, I'm going to do this unpleasant thing, or rather not do this pleasant thing. It's a death to self that it culminates then on Good Friday and Holy Saturday when our Lord is in the tomb. And then hence, the feast on Easter Sunday. So there's this progression downward of, it's John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. And because food is the one thing we can all sacrifice, right? That seems to be the wisdom of the church kicking in here. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I love what and I got my lingering COVID cough. I love what you say, Kennedy, about chastity and chastening. It's just fantastic because we really become slaves. We become slaves, and we're getting freedom from this slavery by means of this chastening. And it is really a all year round thing that we have to gain this virtue. It's all about gaining the virtue, gaining a long-term habit. That's what a virtue is. It's a habit, something that you start to just do automatically that you don't have to think about anymore. And I think relating chastity to chastening is just a great way to say it, because chastity obviously is such a huge problem. We're all slaves to this in some way, in this society that we live in. Unless you do this, you will have so many different problems that you're having to deal with. And unfortunately, this is destroying many marriages because men get into pornography, or, I mean, it doesn't even have to be like hardcore pornography. You just like walk down the street. That is how bad it is. You go to the grocery store. I mean, it's just sad. And unless you have that chastening, you should go become Amish, because you're going to just fall by going to the grocery store. You have to have the chastening to even exist even more in this modern period, because we're just bombarded everywhere. So I really like how you put that, Kennedy.
Father Ripperger, of YouTube fame. Also, demons don't like him. He tells a story. I think I might include it in the book. I don't know. A lot of the impetus for the book was, excuse me, was listening to his talk, How to Raise a Man, which many people listen to. It's a great talk. But he talks about a story where he was living, or he was visiting in Italy, studying, or I think he was doing his PhD there or something of the sort. And if you've ever been to Italy, and I love that place, I'm an Italian citizen. I lived there for a time, and it's great. However, even when I was living there in 2002, 2001, 2002, even then, you know, the expression, the corruption of the best is the worst, that applies to Italy. It's the best, but the corruption of it makes it the worst in a moral sense. I mean, it's scandalous how accessible pornography is. It's unbelievable. It's like you go by a newsstand and there's basically just like, you know how here at least they cover up the dirty magazines and they're behind or something like that. It's not the case there. It's just there. So you're like a 10-year-old, you just see it. And in a way, it's weird because it's almost like, in the sense with some people, it has the opposite effect, because if you're just overexposed to something that's decadent, you almost become uninterested in it. So it's strange how they're just, in a sense, comfortable with nudity there. I don't know. It's very different. However, it's bad in a lot of the ways that it's presented. And Ripperger tells the story how he was on the streetcar in Rome in the middle of July. So people weren't wearing a lot of clothes. So he's trying to keep custody of the eyes, you know, so he's looking down or whatever. And then he gets off the place and he looks up and there's a billboard with basically a naked woman, and he looks down. And then he sees on the ground some tabloid with some naked celebrity on the front, and he's like, and it's there. But he laughs and he just goes, he's like, okay, God, I get it. I can't just have custody of the eyes. I also have to have custody of the mind. Okay. And this is where, you know, I love me the Amish. I live not too far from Amish country. There's a bunch of Amish country in Ontario, and that's great. However, you do have to stay in that closed society. And I'm not saying that no Amish people build actual hardened virtue. They probably do. But if you don't stay in that closed society, then you run the risk of being subject to, let's say, overwhelming temptations because of things you've never built a resolve against. So the most important way to do it, or the most effective way to do it, is not just, and again, you never intentionally subject yourself to sexual temptation. You don't just do that. It's like, well, I'll just go and, like, you know, do a little bit of this. You don't do that because it's sinful to do so. However, you recognize the fact that it will happen. So then you say, what am I going to do in order to be prepared for this thing? And the way to do that is to chasten. But then you got to go one step further. And you have to go not just in chastening, but you actually have to get to the point to mortify. And to say what Jake was saying there, I'll read this little passage here, and it says, in order
Real
to chasten,
quick before you do that, Kennedy, sorry, fellas, the baby's up and Mrs. needs some rest. So
okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
Thanks,
jet.
brother. Thanks for being here, man.
This was good.
All right, adios.
All right, I'll watch the rest of it later. See you.
Okay. See you, buddy. Classic. I'm surprised one of mine isn't up yet. In order to chasten ourselves to accept chastisements from God that lead us to virtue, we need to mortify the flesh. In many cases, we could use the words chasten and mortify interchangeably, but there is a nuance between the two that complement one another. The word mortify comes from the word mors, which refers to death. This means that mortification goes a step further than chastisement. So what Jake was saying, it speaks to a mini death of the body. And and you know what? Even back to this, I never made this connection till now. The fact that in Lent, historically, you're basically a vegetarian, it shows that we are fallen, because before the fall, it's pretty much a claim that there was universal vegetarianism.
Yeah.
So it actually kind of shows that we aren't even in that pre-fallen state, because when we try to live like we were designed to live because of sin, we can't even do that. It makes us weak. I never made that connection until right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And that brings up what you're saying brings up, and what you said about Ripperger, I think that brings up something very important, and that is, how do we train our sons to have the virtue of chastity in this situation where we're bombarded do we sort of, I mean, like you said, you can go Amish, but then there's a certain extreme in that sense. And my baby's up, so 1 second, I'll be right back.
Yeah, everyone's just leaving me hanging here. No, it's true. So anyway, Lent is coming up. So not that I'm trying to just grift a book here, but Amazon Prime. I know maybe you don't like Amazon. Maybe it's your Catholic bookstore. I don't know what your shipping's like. You got a couple days you could buy this thing before it starts. Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity. There it is. We have to go one step further than just thinking of ourselves as these animals that need to be disciplined. And we have to go further too. We are supposed to be adopted sons of God, which means that we have to become worthy of being so. We're sort of invited into this family. We're invited into this heavenly reality because of our baptism. But then there's a certain responsibility that comes along with that. Oh, that sleepy hair right there. There's a certain reality that comes along with that. So this Lent, I'm going to encourage people to adopt legitimate fasting in ways that they haven't before. And one of the things that we have to accept about ourselves is that we are, generally speaking, weaker than our ancestors when it comes to physical things. We just are. If you've ever known, there's an analogy I'll use. If you've ever known people who grew up as farmers, there's just a certain sleep schedule. There's a certain work output level that they're used to because they grew up that way. And it's very hard for people who have not lived that way to adopt that thing. It's funny. It doesn't mean that people who didn't grow up as farmers can't expend as many calories in a day. It doesn't mean that they can't become stronger or more fit. It doesn't mean anything at all. But there's actually just a particular way of life that you almost have to be born into in order to do it effectively, for the most part. And compared to our ancestors, we're like that in a lot of ways. We just have never really had fasting discipline. We just haven't. It's not part of our culture. So there's so many, again, it's not just a physical thing. There are so many aspects of like the psychological. So if you're somebody who's never fasted before in a way that even approaches our ancestors, which I was until like 4 years ago, if you're somebody like that, you don't even have a frame of reference, like how to do it. Like even in the traditional rules of Lenten fasting, even 7-year-olds are supposed to give up meat, basically, unless there's some sort of health reason. That alone is crazy for people today. So when you're approaching this season, one of the biggest pitfalls, and I've fallen into this to pray to this, as I'm sure many people have. One of the biggest pitfalls is saying, I'm going to do things like my ancestors and just go for it. But you haven't ever done it before. 99% of the time, you're actually going to fail. You just will. Because, I remember I adopted basically a traditional Lenten discipline. Like I was going to do, basically live as a vegan with fish and skip breakfast and whatever, all these things. And I got sick. Like, I don't know if that's the exact reason, but within like a couple weeks, I was just getting this continual strep throat. I don't know. I was just so weak. I think that actually did me in. And I had enough penances from being sick for most of Lent. But it was too much and it was too fast. I tried, but it was silly of me. I should have said, I'm just going to do, fish and dairy, at least have that. And normal meals, but just do one at a time. So I've realized, 3 or 4 Lents later, finally I'm at the point where I'll struggle through basically just intermittent fasting and partial abstinence every day. So just one meat meal a day. And then Wednesdays and Fridays, just, no meat at all. But I'll still have dairy this time because I'm still not at the point where I could do that for 46 days and not basically fail. I don't know if you've experienced something similar, Tim.
Oh yeah. So excuse me again, COVID. Yeah. So St. John Cassian, I try to continually recommend, if you want to go to the next level of spiritual reading, St. John Cassian institutes and conferences are the foundation of Western spirituality, but they're totally unknown. So in the conferences, he talks about what he calls immoderate zeal. And that is what the fathers talk about. And many saints have actually suffered from immoderate zeal, like St. John Chrysostom. He went and fasted and like got sick as well. So yeah, so it's just an act of humility to say, hey, I've never fasted before. I've never done this. So I need to go slow. I need to start small. Maybe this is too much. There's like in our Fellowship of St. Anthony, we've got, I think about 45 members now. And it's going to be interesting because everybody's kind of at a different level. There's some beginners, some more experienced fasters or whatever, but the difference here is at least we have a group together to try to support one another. I think that makes it a little bit different. Like if you're all alone trying to take a huge load on, you'll probably fail a lot sooner. The other thing to keep in mind too is that when you fail in a Lenten resolution, that's not a sin. Unless you've like made a solemn vow or something, but you don't make a solemn vow. Making a resolution like this just to do a discipline, that's not a sin. That's just a weakness. So, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. If you fail, you fail. Make the sign of the cross. Say, thank you, God, for giving me this moment of humility. I need you. Help me to do better tomorrow and get back up again. And don't listen to the devil, because the devil is going to come to you and try to destroy your resolutions completely. The only thing that we're actually bound to under pain of mortal sin is the bare minimum that the church gives us right now, which is Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, abstinence on all Fridays, which is totally bare minimum. You have to do that under pain of sin, but that's an important thing if you're scrupulous.
Yeah, but even then, there's that amorphous caveat, at least with the bishops of Canada and the States, where you can substitute another penance, which no one's ever defined. So I remember I was at a meeting, like a professional development day with Catholic teachers, and the chaplain, who was not a priest, so anyway, was like, no, we can still go for they would book this restaurant for like a roast beef buffet on these PD days. It was like a tradition. We can still do it even though it's Friday and Lent, because like you can give up something else.
That's
so everyone was like,
yeah.
Oh, and that's technically, this is the thing. I was having this conversation with one of my priests the other day. Of course, there are traditionalists who are legalists. Anybody could be a legalist, but traditionalism is like anti-legalism. It's not legalism at all. It's actually black and white. Legalism is the modern paradigm of what can we get away with and how. That's what legalism is. Whereas traditionalism is, what are the rules? And I'll just follow those. You're not a legalist if you drive the speed limit. You're just a law-abiding citizen.
Yeah.
You're a legalist if you're like, I'm going to find out where all the cops, and I don't believe speed limits are even that effective. It's just an analogy, people, don't worry. But it's like, where are all the cops? I'm going to get my radar going so I can like drive 100 and then 50 and then 100 and then 50, and I can do whatever I want without ever getting in trouble. That's literally what the legalist is, being your average lawyer of like, how can we get you off of this crime by making it seem like you didn't actually do it. That's what the modern paradigm is in the church, sadly. So practical things you can do. We got about 5 minutes here. Practical things you can do to prepare for, you got 2 days. So I don't know what you're doing if you're listening to this for Lent. I have no idea, but I'll tell you what I'm doing, and then you can decide. This is not me self-aggrandizing, because there are people who do much more than I do. Okay. Intermittent fasting. I have half in mind. Maybe I will write this book one day. More like a booklet. It'd be like 80 pages. How the church was right before the world figured it out. Something like that. We see all these things coming back into fashion. Even now, talking about fasting, for example, there are people now that are attempting 40-day water fasts.
Oh, wow.
They're actually doing it. And there's all these doctors who are like these evolutionists, and they're on these podcasts talking about why you should and why it's possible. So it's kind of amazing, because it's like, yeah, so Christ did 40 days. It's literally what happened. It's not just a metaphor. Modernist, he actually fasted for 40 days. Even the evolutionists can figure that out, you idiots. And I know a guy who did 20-day water fast, and he's just a regular dude. Now, he doesn't have children. That's important, because they say those first 3 or 4 days, you're like the worst person on earth, because you're just getting used to being hangry the whole time, which is tough to do with kids. But he was like, yeah, by day 20, he's like, I felt like I could do it forever. He's like, I really did. Just black coffee, salt, that sort of thing. It doesn't say in the Bible that Christ didn't drink water. It just says he fasted. Fasting does not mean not drinking water. And then there's these people, these doctors talking about 40-day water fast, and your body changes, and they say you heal, like you actually have this. They're like within 7 or 8 days, you actually start to have like aches and pains go away, and you have like, anyway, that's all the story. So there are people that can do it, but how do we get to that point? Well, what I'm going to do is just what used to be called normal eating habits, which is where the word breakfast comes from. I'm just going to do intermittent fasting, so I just won't eat till lunch. I'll drink coffee, maybe some broth, something like that, depending on the time. And then I'll just eat 2 meals a day. One will just be like regular size lunch, whatever, and then dinner will be normal. No snacks, no alcohol. Our ancestors did drink alcohol during Lent, though, so that's not like that's something that's traditional. That's just something we're going to do.
Yeah.
Partial abstinence every day, which means it's just 1 meat meal a day. I'm still going to have eggs and dairy. I'm not prepared to go that far, just personally. And then Wednesdays and Fridays, just full abstinence. So that same sort of fasting, but just full abstinence. So just no meat those days, just as a thing. And then as far as other things, just continuing with working out and sort of that sort of thing. But that's what I do anyway. So that's what I'm going to do. So that's not nearly as hardcore as some people I know. Like it's not. But compared to what I was doing 4 years ago, it's like night and day. But I've had to spend 3 Lents and Advents getting to the point where I could do that and sustain it. So if wherever you are, you maybe just be like a regular dude and you don't know what to do. You just start with one thing. So you say, like, you're listening to Taylor Marshall or something like that. He's talking about these ancient Lents. You're like, man, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go hardcore. You're probably not. You're probably going to fail. You're probably going to get sick. So pick one thing and say, the first thing I'm going to do for the first time in my life is I am not going to snack and drink pop, because soda is not the right way to say it. It's pop, because that's Midwest and Canada unite on the proper verbiage there.
Yes, there we go.
Just don't drink pop, and don't put sugar in your coffee, and don't fast, or don't eat between meals. Sounds really simple. Then you look at your diet and you go, oh my goodness, that's almost 1/3 of my calories. That alone is going to be very difficult. What are you going to do for Lent, Tim?
I just wanted to show, somebody was asking for the Fellowship of St. Anthony.
Okay.
So this is a group that we put together. So this is open to guild members. So if a guild member is a patron of Meaning of Catholic, if you can't afford to become a patron of Meaning of Catholic, oh, sorry. Wow, I did. You put that up.
I just did that to be nice. Someone said Timothy's a good dad.
I'm not a good dad just because I picked up my baby. Okay, so if you can't afford to be a guild member, just email me. I'll send you the benefits if you can't afford it. But most people can afford like $5 a month. But so Fellowship of St. Anthony is part of our Meaning of Catholic Guild. And it is, yeah, it has 46 members now. Rosemary is going to chime in with her opinion, perhaps, as well. Sweetheart, you want to tell what you're doing for Lent? There she is.
Okay. Like, I'm keeping my dad honest by
just
this podcast.
Just turned 2 yesterday, so happy birthday to Rosemary. Yeah. Okay, I got the document finally. Okay, so this is what we're all doing. We have a tier 1 and a tier 2. Tier 1, everybody commits to tier 1, and then tier 2 you can do on your own privately if you want, and secretly, and you can add. Those are just kind of like recommended additions if you want privately. But tier 1 is simply designed to be hard enough that we can support each other. So it's basically vegetarian diet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Only drinks are black coffee, tea, or water. Milk is you can have. We're taking out all alcohol except Sundays, no sweets, and then we're fasting each Wednesday and Friday. We're praying Morning Our Father. We're praying the prayer we're offering all of this for our clergy. Mm-hmm. This group is we kind of feel like it has been formed a little bit by St. Anthony of the Desert, because I believe he was a layman and he actually supported the bishops in his monkish fasting. So we're praying the prayer to avert God's wrath every day. And then we're reading the life of St. Anthony, reading the daily reading. So it's just a group that's coming together right now with Meaning of Catholic. And then you can, so tier 2 is like vegan all of Lent, more stuff. But basically the point is, Lent, ultimately, there really should be a public, common, communal element to Lent. And then there are personal extras that people take on. St. Benedict actually talks about this in his rule, if I recall. So, if you have a parish group or you want to form something like this, or join Exodus 90 late, or you can join Fellowship of St. Anthony, something like this is often very helpful, especially if you're a beginner. So yeah, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to, at least in Michigan, we've got a big Polish community. So we've got the Punchkis coming tomorrow. What do you guys do for Mardi Gras? Anything?
Oh, pancakes. Pancakes.
Okay.
Do you guys call it Pancake Tuesday as well? Is that like a thing?
It's mainly Fat Tuesday is what it's mainly called in my area of Michigan.
Okay.
But pancakes too. I know.
We call it Pancake
Use up
Tuesday.
the eggs. Okay.
It's a big thing. So actually, vaccine apartheid ends tomorrow in Ontario. Yay, human rights again.
Right.
It's wonderful. Yeah. I'll never forget, by the way. So don't even think that it's over politicians. It's just getting started. I'm literally going to spend, just a shout out to all the politicians, I'm going to spend my life destroying you with my literary career. That's like my goal in life. And I'm happy about it. I just want to bring you down for the rest of my life for you being such petulant, feckless cowards. In any case, that's my Lenten resolution, is to destroy all the politicians. So tomorrow we can go into a restaurant legally. I've been to some because places weren't checking. That's fine. But we can go tomorrow, whatever. So we'll probably go out for supper. Yeah, we'll probably dismantle the vat. There you go. We'll probably go out for supper or something like that, which we haven't done in a long time. And you know what, though? It's funny. I'm actually going to give a word of caution here. There's a reason why historically, this is the last thing I'll say, with Septuagesima, Sexagesima, there was always like an aspect of Lenten fasting that would start. So they would say, historically, for example, if they were going to do the whole vegan idea, they would say on Sexagesima or give up just dairy, start now. They'd say, because I'll tell you what the thing that will happen on Ash Wednesday, if you blow it all out on Fat Tuesday and you like have tons of sugars and things like that, you'll have an insane crash on Ash Wednesday. I learned this on one of the Exodus 90s that I did. It was early in like the Christmas season. So I had been it was like January 12th or something. So I was just full cookies and Christmas and eggnog mode still. Yeah. And then I remember after supper on the first day of it, I had to like sit down on the couch and I was like, sweetie, I'm like lightheaded and
sugar withdrawal is real.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
So I would just say, just still be careful, because it'll make you really likely to fail on your first day, which is just not a good way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Fat Tuesday, it's really about using up all the eggs and meat in your house. It's not about like going extra. Punchkis are supposed to be made by the home, but we do a little celebration. But I mean, don't go overboard. Just try to use up the meat and eggs or whatever you have. But it's okay to celebrate a little bit before we get into the hardcore. I love Quinquagesima Sunday. It's such a beautiful introduction. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will suffer. And then the beautiful epistle of St. Paul, the most classic text of St. Paul ever, exhorting us to what is the whole point. If I have the tongues of angels, if I give my body to be burned, in other words, if you have a perfect Lent, that's absolutely, you're fasting so hardcore, you got a 46-day water fast and all this insanity. But if you have not charity, it's a total waste of time. Complete. If
you're hangry the whole time and ruin everybody's life, it's the worst.
Yeah. If you become a devil, well, you've overcome gluttony and lust. You don't deal with that, but you're consumed with pride. Now you're Lucifer. Congratulations. Charity is the whole point. The whole point is to grow in charity. So if you're not growing in charity, change what you're doing, because all of this is a means to one end, which is charity for God and brother. So with that, let's offer up a Pater Noster for all of our Lents. Stay tuned to Meaning of Catholic. I forgot to mention, we're actually having a Ukraine show on Thursday with an expert on Ukraine. So we'll talk about that. That'll be great. He's gonna give both sides. We're gonna have it's gonna be Ukraine 3 perspectives: Ukraine Western perspective, Ukraine Russian perspective, and then Ukraine Fatima perspective. It's gonna be good. I'm excited for this because there's actually somebody, I don't know if it's Lucia or other seers or who else, but somebody mentions Ukraine at some point in the Fatima message. So that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be for patrons on Thursday. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/meaningofcatholic. You can also donate at meaningofcatholic.com. Make sure to buy the book, Terror of Demons. That's linked below as well. So that's a great Lenten book, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity. All right, let's offer up a Pater Noster for the intention of our Lent. Let's all offer up this Lent to grow in charity. Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater Noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Jesus is King.